I'm talking right now.
A bit louder?
I have to talk a little bit louder.
A bit
I have to talk a little bit softer. I became interested in particular in this figure who you mentioned, Wang Yangming. And I think I was interested in him because he really was a champion of a certain kind of thinking for yourself, a certain kind of authenticity to the self, driving his moral thinking. And I think I found that concept very inspiring. He has as I said, this emphasis on kind of finding your own person and being true to that as a ideal that I think speaks to me both in the charisma of his own words, but also in the charisma of his person. He was a very important political figure. He served as Secretary of Defense, essentially, and as a major general at multiple points in his time. And so he had this kind of dual character as a philosopher and as an actor. There's a beautiful story that survives in an autobiographical telling of his, which is why he became dissatisfied with his predecessors. So just to dig a bit deeper into the history, there was a very important sort of synthetic figure who's often compared to Aquinas, who sort of stood at the end of the scholastic tradition and provided this, particularly influential synthesis of many of the ideas that had gone before. The end is too strong, but you understand what I'm saying. And this figure was called Jushi, and Jushi's synthesis was incredibly influential. It pervaded Wang's world. And Jushi basically believed, although it's a little more complicated than this, but he basically believed that the moral law of the universe is implicit in, and the moral and physical laws of the universe are implicit in any particular object. And he prescribed, or at least, let's say, a caricature of him prescribed an epistemological method for discovering those laws by investigating those objects. And Wang tells a story of when he was a kid, he and a friend said, okay, let's do it. We'll find out the moral and physical laws. And the friend tried first in some tellings of this and failed. And Wang thought, well, of course, he's not good enough, so I'll try. And Wang tried and tried and tried for several days, and he became sick. He overexhausted himself, and trying to investigate objects to discover the moral law. And this was in his telling. I mean, it's not clear whether it's true to history, a sort of moment when he lost faith in the orthodoxy. So some people would have gone away and said, well, I'm not talented enough. That wasn't Wang's response. His response was, the doctrine must be wrong. And that was the beginning of his search for an alternative system. And so in contrast to Jushi, who held a doctrine about the kind of objective character of these, or maybe both believed in the objective character, but let's say the mind external, mind independent character of the laws of the universe, in particular of the moral laws. Wang's famous doctrine was that the mind is the moral principle. And on my reading, by that he meant that the sort of moral principle is already within you. And he certainly meant to reject this epistemological method, this method of finding out the moral laws, that you look at the chair, or in his case, the bamboo. And he meant instead to say that the only way to find the moral principles was to, in some sense, look in yourself. He wouldn't have put it quite that way. He didn't think that what you should do is sit around and just look internally with your eyes closed. He actually thought that the self was manifest in action. So for him, the sort of coming to know the self was in part about realizing the self through action, and that's part of this doctrine that I mentioned before, that the unity of knowledge and action. So he thought that part of recognizing or understanding the moral principles was acting on them. And so there was a much more complicated, almost bidirectional relationship between knowledge of the moral principles and moral action than Jushi had thought, where, or at least a caricature of Jushi had thought, where knowledge comes first and then moral action follows once you've acquired the relevant knowledge. Wang's articulation of the method was that the crucial thing was to eliminate selfish desires. So, no surprise that there had been a large Buddhist influence in Chinese thought starting even earlier, but really having a major presence in the 6th century and on. So Wang lived from 1472 to 1529. So, a long period after that, 8 centuries, 9 centuries on. But the way that Wang understood things was a bit different, at least from some versions of Buddhism, although there are many versions of these thoughts around. He thought that every person has in themselves a pure moral faculty. I like to translate this, or anyway gloss this or interpret this, as conscience. I think that really speaks to us, that we have in ourselves this sort of pure source of moral judgment. And he thought that if you could, as I've put it, if you could eliminate the white noise of selfish desires, the clear note of your conscience would shine through. And so he emphasized to his students not so much the sort of introspection aspect, not so much the do a particular thing while you're acting, but more to attack selfish desires when they come. And he didn't think that that was something that you could do once and for all. It wasn't like you sat down and you just tilled the garden and they would never grow again, or weeded the garden and they would never grow again. He thought that this was a constant, exercise of vigilance to watch the selfish desires as they arise and eradicate them as they arose. But he didn't think that there was a moment of doing that was separate from action. It was part of moral action. So I think he thought that you could be a fully moral agent, whether you were a teacher or a tradesperson or a civil servant, and that was a crucially kind of I wouldn't say democratic in the political sense, but certainly democratic in the sort of in the sense of universal. He thought that even illiterate people could become sages, which was in stark contrast to a tradition before him. Whether or not this was sort of part or parcel of the ideas, we could dispute. But just in practice, I had focused much more on textual learning as a route, that was only available to elites. Textual learning as a route to moral salvation. There are some beautiful passages. First of all, he played a very important part in an uprising he fought an uprising against the emperor. And at a crucial moment, the emperor ordered him to not attack and wait so that the emperor could arrive and be the leader of the army that would crush the rebellion. And Wang decided to attack because he believed that that would spare more lives. So this was an act, I think, of conscience in the way that we would think of it, and in which he was true to himself. But there's another kind of striking fact about him, a passage that was brought to my attention by my former colleague Trenton Wilson at Princeton, where Wang talks about how in the heat of battle, while he was, attacking other people, he felt at most at one with himself in some sense, or free of the obscurations of selfish desires. And he describes how he's not totally sure that that's a great position to find himself in, but that's something that another moment where he thought he was sort of acting freely without constraints in the relevant way. So I think that passage illustrates, both of those examples, the first one illustrates the upsides of the method, and according to me, the second maybe illustrates the downsides, that there are many times when we feel at one with ourselves where we may not be doing something that is perfectly morally okay. Yeah, great. Thank you so much, David. This was great.